Hello, and thanks for clicking on the video. In this one, I'm painting Fellgorravagers. I built and primed 6 of the kill team, focusing mainly on the Chaos Tainted ones. Now, I've got 2 main goals for this video. The first one is to try and paint a bit quicker, and the second one is to try and create a cool and creative custom scheme for my Fellgors that really leans into the chaos of those 4 chaos specifically tainted members of this kill team. I chose to paint the leader, the Ironhorn, first, and I chose to undercoat him with a purple. And I did this because I've been watching Ninjon recently, and he suggested doing this for some models, so I thought I'd give it a go. I don't think it really worked out for me in this instance. I don't know what I did wrong, but the purple just didn't kind of work with the grey. So I painted up his skin in various grey tones. I had this vision in my head of this really shadowy figure, these desaturated greys, with maybe a pop of red for the eyes, making him look really evil. The idea behind painting this guy first was to create a default scheme that I could then make variants of for my Chaos Tainted members of the team. Unfortunately for me, when I finished painting this, I was not happy with the skin. For some reason, the purple in the shadows wasn't working for me. Perhaps I chose the wrong colour for my shadows here. And when I painted everything else, it just didn't kind of work. He kind of looked boring and dull. The grey just didn't stand out. So I'll show you what that looks like, just so you can see my failure. And then we'll move on to painting the skin some brown tones instead. I wanted to try speeding up my video and my paint job in this, so I've quite quickly gone over the rest of the parts of the model, so I'll just briefly explain how I painted those. The brown parts are done with a dark brown that I just added ice yellow to. You can do that with any real dark brown. I think I used bootstrap brown from Armypainter. The metal parts are Vallejo metal color gun metal grey, and then for this guy I did try an Agrex Earthshade wash over the top, but I did dilute it down with Lamia medium. And the skin that you can see me highlighting up now was a base coat of charred brown followed by dark flesh tone and then grunge brown, all from Vallejo's game colour range. And those 3 colours are important because they're what I'm going to use to make my variant mixes later on. The fur parts were just black with Skaven Blight dinge to keep things simple and quick. And after a few other tiny details, this is what my leader, my default scheme, looked like. Now, he's not the most fantastic painted miniature ever, but considering that I painted him in one 4 to 5 hour session, that's really good for me, and I did that much quicker than I normally do, and for that, he's not that bad. So I wanted to take this and crack on with a couple more members of the kill team, but this time leaning into their chaos taintedness and doing some variants of the skin tones. However, just before I start painting those, I wanted to bring you to the wet palette here and show you what I was doing. Now, this is the wet palette after I'd finished all of the painting, so it's retrospective, but I'm showing those 3 colours that were very important. And what I wanted to demonstrate here was how I was mixing them with different hues so that I could create variant skin tones. So what I'm pointing to here is the basic 3 browns, but then I used some magenta colours to mix in to those. So the dark brown I mixed into the dark magenta to create a dark base coat that had magenta in it, and then used the middle one with the middle one and the light one with the light one. And that gave me a bunch of different tones. And I did the same thing with reds for the second character that I'm going to be painting later on in the video. And the first up of the pair is the Herd Goad, who is quite clearly aligned to Slaanesh. I wanted the skin on this guy to have magenta hues to represent that pinkish, reddish colour that is so typical with Slaanesh, and so that's where I started with my dark magenta and then highlighting up with different layers of slightly brighter magenta and pink tones. The mixes I made for this skin were quite complicated. I did mix in a lot of the browns and different versions of the browns for different stages, and sort of the different magentas as well, so it's not something I can easily give you a recipe for, unfortunately. But one main tip I can give you is to make sure that there's a little bit of the same colour mixed into every mix that you make, as that will unify your colours and make sure that every single member of your kill team still looks similar, even if you've painted them with different coloured skin tones. After I'd finished highlighting up all the muscles, this is what my skin looked like at this stage. I then proceeded to do all of the same steps that I did on the first Fellgor, the Ironhorn. So I painted the first Skaven Blight dinge, and then I covered all of the metals in gunmetal grey from Vallejo metal colour, and then I used my brown mixes to do all of the leather pouches and that stuff too. When I was painting this guy, I also decided that all of the fabric and material should be black between the legs in the hanging parts. So I was using charcoal and sombre grey for that from Vallejo. And that just gave me a simple black mix that was a bit different from the Skaven Blight dinge on the fur. I wanted to make sure that they didn't look exactly the same, so that added blue in the sombre grey, that just helps to differentiate those different black parts from each other. So after finishing up some highlights on some of the parts and doing some of the metals, as I mentioned before, I experimented with using Model S Silver from Vallejo on this one, and that really helps to shine, which brings out those metal parts and makes them really shiny. Probably wouldn't be that shiny if they were on a Gallo Dark in the rusty darkness of space, but I just thought it looked nice, so I was going for it, and I wanted speed, so I wasn't worried about it too much. Then I dotted the eyes pink, and I did a little bit of I basically did one tiny ring of OSL around the eyes where I just put a slightly darker magenta around the eyes to make it look like there was a glow. And that was the Herd Goat finished, but I'm not going to show him now, I'm going to show his reveal at the end, so we're going to move straight on to painting the Mangler. So it was the same story with this guy, except using reds instead of magentas, because this one seems aligned to Khorne, who's anger and rage, so it's all represented with reds. You can see that the first coat here was a mix of that brown and that red, so we ended up with quite a dark red-brown, and I applied that everywhere, and then slowly I increased my highlight so that it had more red and lighter brown in it, and before I knew it, I was highlighting all the way up to a fairly vibrant red. For his muscles, I was just trying to follow the volumes and paint towards the top of the muscles with brighter colours. The key thing here is not to do thin lines. When it comes to these volumes, you want to paint quite a lot of them, the highlight, on the upward facing areas, so often more than you'd think. I was trying to follow about a 75% rule, where I was trying to cover about 75% of the previous layer with the next highlight. By ensuring that each highlight mix has a little bit of the browns in it as well, I ensure that all of these colours stay unified, and every time I apply a new reddish brown as the next highlight, it stays in keeping with the layers underneath it. And you can see as I'm working up the muscles here on the screen, everything is looking really nice and in keeping. The highlights look like they should belong there. It doesn't look like I've just picked random paints that don't really fit together. So with all those highlights painted and ready, the miniature began to look really good, so we had to paint all the other parts, and once again did that in the exact same way as the others. There were a couple of details on this guy that I did differently, but for the most part the leather parts were the same, although there were just less of them on this character, and then the fur was the same with Skaven Blight dinge. I did the black cloth materials the same with charcoal and sombre grey. And you may notice I've also base coated his face guard a very vibrant red. It was Scarlet Blood from Vallejo because that colour is so saturated. And then I was highlighting it with pure Sunset Orange, and I did that just because I wanted a really bright contrast highlight, but I didn't want to take ages doing different layers, so I just jumped to it immediately. For the metal parts, it was the same thing again, gunmetal grey and then Model Air Silver. For the horns, I applied decomposed flesh by AK Interactive over the black primer, and then I used a glaze of my dark brown that I used for my base skin tone, so bootstrap brown, very thinly over the horns just to try and blend them. For all three of these miniatures, I used void war bases, and the very first short I made on the channel will show you how to paint void bases, although for these miniatures, because I was trying to be fast, I did a slightly sped up version of that scheme for them. I was very rough with my brush, very scratchy, added a lot of texture very quickly to these bases just to try and give them some visual interest very quickly. I then also did a really speedy version of Rust where I just did the browns that I already had on my palette from the skin tones, so that's dark flesh tone and grunge brown, and I just added those as patches of Rust all over in random spots and down in the gaps in the recesses as well, until I had bases that looked like this. So with all that done, I can show you the final miniatures. First up is the Slaanesh Herd Goat. I was much happier with this guy than I was the default main Iron Horn that I painted. I think the magenta in the skin adds a lot of character and a lot of interest to this model, and considering again I only painted this in one sort of 4 to 5 hour session, I think it turned out pretty good. So next up is the Mangler. This one has got to be my favourite of the three. Somehow the muscles just turned out really good and all the highlight layers just work really well together. So he just looks brilliant. I think the little detail of his face mask being a bright red is a really nice pop of colour in the centre sort of focus area of the model. And yeah, all the other details come together and make it look really good. So I was very, very happy with this one. So now I thought to finish out the video, I will show all three of the miniatures I painted in this one together. I think what I really like about these three is that they're all different, but they look in keeping, and so they look like they could all be part of the same team. I also don't normally manage to paint 3 miniatures in 1 week, so this was a really good practice for me in terms of painting quicker, painting faster. I wouldn't exactly call it speed painting because I didn't use speed paints or anything like that. It still wasn't that quick, but it was definitely faster than I usually do, so that was great for me. There are still Nurgle and Tzeentch versions of this that I can paint, so I could potentially do a part 2 of this in the future as well. I hope you like these miniatures and think they look as cool as I do. And I want to say a big thanks for watching, and I'll see you hopefully in the next one.